Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of the Compact Coaster series. In this episode, we're going to be doing a more vintage style wood coaster. From the poll on Instagram, this was the winning choice. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Be sure to check out the description for a link to the blueprint. If you do like the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And consider subscribing to the channel if you want to get more builds similar to this that are ready to drop into your parks. Alright, so for this build, I decided to start out in the fatter rectangle section of the scenario. I knew I was going to extend out a little bit just because I wanted it to be a little more linear, but I didn't think the really narrow yellow one in the back would have been enough because I was thinking I'd have wide turns at the top. During this build, I did have snap on. That way I could kind of keep really straight hills. I feel like the more vintage style, the hills aren't, maybe not as evolved as, the current day and age building where the hills are computer perfect, smooth, and that sort of thing. So I feel like using the snap and making the hills really symmetrical and kind of like they only had options to like a few different types of pieces and they just kind of copied those features around the track and that sort of thing. I also, for all the turns, kept those flat. I do go back in and I had a little bit of banking at the end, but not a whole lot. I don't think it'd be very accurate for a vintage coaster to have these really banked turns or these swooping kind of hill turns and that sort of thing. So that was my reasoning behind keeping them flat like they are. I did end up looking at a couple of old vintage coasters. I tried Googling a little bit. Photo reference was sort of hard to find, old pictures and that sort of thing. They just didn't really have great shots. I did notice that a lot of the coasters had the second lower turn under the first turn. I don't know if that was to kind of save on supports or something like that. So I did try to keep that in mind when I was building the turnaround points here. And I also noticed that a lot of the track was like side by side of the other track, and there was some gaps between the two sides, but the hills and everything were like right beside each other, kind of like I'm running the backside here. So for this layout currently, I was really trying to just kind of wrap this one up so I could start doing some tests and actually look to where excitement ratings and that sort of thing was. Coming back towards the station gave me quite a headache. I couldn't figure out how I really wanted to get back to the station. And I know a lot of the older tracks had longer stretches of like brake runs and just a long flat track coming back to the station. But since this is Planet Coaster and that sort of thing can really kill a rating, I wanted to try to avoid that as much as I can without going out of the vintage kind of theme. But as for the drops here, I did do a couple double down drops. I did notice that was something that was extremely common looking in the older coasters that I was seeing online. I think nearly all the ones that I saw had a double drop or a double up hill in them somewhere. So I would make sure to incorporate a couple of those. I think there's one after the first big turn, and then there's also one coming up into the third turn. And at this point in the video, I just struggle really hard to find out how to get this station platform. I was trying to angle it along the side of the turn here. I didn't think that it would be realistic seeming if I put the station through the turn there and kind of killed the supports, because I feel like back in the day, they probably weren't very advanced supports and they would really need to be there. I don't think they could build a station that was also supporting the coaster. I didn't feel like that would have fit. So anyways, I'm just going to skip over my struggle with the station here. Okay, and this is the conclusion that I ended up with. I moved over to the really linear section in the scenario, and that way I could have the station coming out the back and that sort of thing. Oh, I don't know if you noticed right there, the station isn't level and I couldn't get it to become level. Hold on, let me grab that for you. All right, you see that? It's just totally out of whack there, and it wouldn't straighten up. I deleted it, put it back. I tried moving it with the after tools, and nothing would fix it. So in my mind, it's a old vintage coaster, and they just screwed up the build on the station, or over time, maybe it sank into the ground or something like that, and they just haven't bothered fixing it. So that's the theming we're going to go for here. All right, and on to the paint scheme. I went for a really weathered wood look, kind of like it was actually vintage and that sort of thing. So I took out some of the browns and moved it more towards the gray. And I also did the inside of the track a like eggshell white that was a little bit darker than like pure white and that sort of thing. For the train colors, I went with red and blue. I feel like for Pier / vintage kind of style coasters, red, white, and blue seem to be pretty popular, at least here in the US. And I feel like it's a very pleasant scheme to look at. All right, jumping into the heat maps for this build, as you can see, very little of the coaster actually came out exciting the first go around. I think the results are like 3 excitement and maybe 2 fear and like 0.4 nausea or something like that. So I had to go back in and try to fix it. As much as I'm wanting to stay true to the theming and that sort of thing, we are putting this in Planet Coaster, and the ride needs to be attractive rating wise, in my opinion. Also, with the perfectly straight track going up the hills and that sort of thing, I did select those and do a couple of smooth hits so that way they didn't look so like perfectly straight when you're going down the hill, but they're not as curved as a new wood coaster might be. And you also might have been noticing I am adding a couple more dips and kind of exaggerating some of the tops of the hills so that way we actually throw our people into airtime moments. And in the end, it's mainly the airtime moments that really gets the excitement rating up on this style coaster. And there's a quick look of the train going along the back section of the track, and it's all green now, whereas originally it was all red. But for the front part here that I'm working on, I was unable to get that section into the green. I tried steepening the drop or making it smoother, and none of which seemed to help. So moving on, another really well-known aspect, I think, for the old coasters is having the little sign at the very top of the lift hill. I saw that in a whole lot of photos that I was looking at online. So I wanted to make sure I incorporated that for this ride. I do wish that there was more options for signs and lettering and that sort of thing in the game. I know there are some other signs and that sort of thing available with different scenery packs within the game, but since we are trying to keep this very generic, the generic scenery pack does not have a whole lot to work with. So some of the signs end up looking illuminated. There's a gradient on that one, and I don't think that would have been time accurate for a vintage ride. So this is kind of moving into the pier side of the ride, I guess, and that sort of thing. So a lot of piers and those sorts of coasters have a ton of lights and neon signs everywhere, flags, and that sort of thing. So you could easily continue off of what I've made here or just swap it around and you could make this into a pier style ride rather than a vintage style. All right, and that is going to wrap up this episode of the Compact Coaster series. We'll take a quick look at what it looks like in our demo park. I kind of placed it on a pier sort of thing so you could get maybe an idea of what that looks like as well. So let's check out the test ratings on that. Our final was 4.4 excitement, 2.5 fear, and 0.37 nausea. Really feel like with these test results, it's perfect for any park since nearly every guest will want to ride this sort of ride. It's a great family ride, and with a blueprint cost of $7,000, it'll be really easy to place. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments below. Let me know what you think of this coaster and if there's any ideas you would have for future Compact Coaster series episodes. If you did like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave. There's going to be a lot more blueprint builds similar to this one in the future, and I'm going to be starting a build through of a challenge mode park soon. And as always, I'm going to leave you with a final ride of this coaster. and I will see you in the next video.